how do we really understand the world around us? I mean, beyond just seeing what happens, how do we figure out why? Why people do what they do, especially in, markets?
That's the big question, isn't it? Moving past just description, finding the underlying logic, the patterns. Can we actually approach human behavior, markets, scientifically?
And that's exactly what we're getting into in this deep dive. We're unpacking ideas from Stephen Cheung's Economic Explanation, the fourth edition, specifically Book 1, The Science of Demand.
Right. It offers a really interesting, maybe even provocative take on economics as a science.
Yeah, it lays out the groundwork, the methodology,
Yeah.
key concepts like demand, scarcity, competition.
And it argues that economic analysis can give us testable, refutable theories. Theories about choices people make when faced with, well, limits, constraints.
So our mission here is to explore this framework.
Yeah.
What makes economic explanation scientific in this view? What are the core assumptions?
And how does it actually help us understand things we see, using examples from the book itself?
Think of it as getting a shortcut to a really powerful, sometimes maybe stark way of thinking about economic puzzles. Okay, let's jump right into this idea. Economics as a science. It feels different, doesn't it, from, say, physics or chemistry? You can't really isolate people in a lab.
You can't. But the source makes a strong case. It starts with something fundamental for any science. The things you study, the phenomena, have to show regularities.
Regularities, you mean like patterns?
Exactly. Predictable patterns in behavior. Things need to happen consistently, at least to some degree, for us to even start analyzing them scientifically. If it was all just random noise.
There'd be nothing to explain.
Right. You look for something that tends to happen again and again. But here's where it gets really interesting, and maybe not what you'd expect.
Okay.
The source argues that facts alone cannot explain facts.
Facts can't explain facts. What does that mean?
It's crucial. Just observing a pattern, like, seeing clouds before it rains, that observation isn't the explanation. That's just describing. To explain why rain follows clouds, you need a theory. A theory proposes a relationship, a mechanism that connects those facts. It goes beyond just saying, this happens, then that happens.
Got it. So the theory is the why. And for it to be scientific in this view, it needs something specific.
Yes. It absolutely must be refutable.
Refutable. Okay, unpack that.
It means the theory has to be capable of being proven wrong by facts, by observation. If your theory is set up so that no possible observation could ever contradict it.
Like if it's true by definition, or just super vague.
Exactly. If it's a tautology true by definition or so vague it can explain literally anything, then, kind of ironically, it explains nothing specific about the real world. It can't be tested.
The source uses that simple example, right? Saying it will rain after clouds appear. You can test that, look for clouds, see if it rains. Maybe it doesn't.
And that doesn't rain. Observation could refute your statement. But if you say either it will rain or it won't rain, well, that's always true. It tells you nothing.
Logically true, but doesn't predict anything specific.
Right. And these tautologies, the source mentions things like MVPQ in monetary theory, though the details aren't the main point here. They can be useful frameworks, but they don't explain why prices changed or why spending went up.
So they need something extra.
Yes, they need to be combined with testable conditions or assumptions about behavior, about the world. That's when they get explanatory power.
The tautology gives you the structure, but you need testable bits added on to actually explain reality.
Precisely. And it's not just tautologies. Vague ideas, inconsistent ideas, they're also outside science because you just can't test them. The book mentions something like an empty room with a black dot.
Meaningless in terms of testing, right?
Right. There's no empirical content, nothing you can observe to check it.
Okay, so let's sum this card up. Scientific economic explanation means looking for theories about observable, regular patterns in behavior.
Theories that are testable and, crucially, refutable. They could be proven wrong by facts. That possibility is key.
Okay. Now, if we're looking for predictable patterns, where do we start? The framework in the book begins with a really fundamental assumption about people. The source calls it the selfish postulate.
Yes, that's a core premise. You could almost call it an axiom for building the theory. It assumes individuals, generally, act in their own self-interest.
Meaning they try to maximize their own benefit, their own satisfaction, given the limits they face.
That's the idea.
Now, using axiom here, does that mean the claim is everyone is literally always selfish, like morally selfish?
That's a really important clarification, and the source implies, no, that's not quite it. An axiom here isn't necessarily a statement about universal human nature or a moral judgment.
Okay. So what is it then?
It's a starting premise, something we assume to be true for the purpose of building a logical theory that allows us to make predictions. It's an analytical tool.
Ah, okay. So it's a foundation that allows for predictable choice if you assume people are pursuing their own gain.
Then, given certain options and limitations, you can start predicting how they'll likely choose.
And that predictability is what makes economic theories testable, like we were just discussing.
Exactly. If behavior was totally random, you couldn't have a science of economics. This postulate, combined with constraints, gives you that potential for predictability.
So it's adopted because it makes economic analysis and prediction possible. It gives a starting point for modeling how decisions are made.
Right.
This leads us nicely to the landscape where these choices happen. Yeah. According to this framework, that landscape is all about scarcity and competition.
Yeah, let's define goods first. The source uses the Chinese term "ika" and defines it as anything where basically having it is better than not having it.
So way broader than just physical
Oh,
stuff.
yeah. Services, relationships, maybe even reputation, anything people value.
Okay. And scarcity. We hear that constantly in economics.
Scarcity just means there isn't enough of a good to satisfy everyone's desires for it freely. The quantity is limited relative to how much people want. It's fundamental.
Land, time, clean air.
Even attention these days. All potentially scarce.
So put it together. Self-interested people, scarce goods. What's the inevitable result?
Competition. It's seen as the natural, unavoidable outcome. If something is scarce and more than one person wants it, they will compete for it.
Even on a desert island, the source says.
That's the extreme example used, yeah. With limited resources, the survivors would inevitably compete.
Makes sense.
Hmm.
But that competition isn't just a free-for-all, right? It happens within rules.
Exactly. Rules of the game. Competition always operates within some framework. These can be formal rules, laws, contracts, property rights.
Property rights seem key here.
They are. They define who owns what, how they can use it, trade it. But there are also informal rules, customs, ethics, social norms. These rules shape how competition happens. They channel it.
Okay, building on that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about demand. How individual choices link up with this idea of utility.
Right. Utility is basically the satisfaction, the subjective happiness someone gets from consuming a good or service.
But it's subjective.
Okay.
Hard to measure, right?
Very hard. The source talks about this. Can we put a number on it? Like you get 10 units of happiness from pizza. That's cardinal utility. Or can we just say you prefer pizza to sushi? That's ordinal utility, just ranking.
And economics tends to focus more on the ranking, the choices we can observe.
Generally, yes. It's more about observing preferences through choices than trying to measure internal feelings precisely. And this leads straight to the law of demand.
The cornerstone.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Basically, holding other things constant, that crucial ceteris paribus, as the price of something goes down, the quantity people want to buy goes up.
Okay. Holding other things constant. That's the key phrase, isn't it? What are those other things?
Things like your income, the price of other goods, substitutes or complements, your tastes, expectations about the future, lots of things.
And the law of demand only applies if those things stay the same.
Correct. The law of demand describes moving along a demand curve when only the price changes. If one of those other things changes, say your income goes up, the whole curve shifts. Different concept.
Crucial distinction. Okay. And then there's that weird exception, Giffen goods.
Ah, yes, the famous theoretical curiosity. A given good is, hypothetically, a very specific type of inferior good where demand actually increases when the price goes up.
Counterintuitive.
Totally. The source acknowledges it's logically possible under very strict theoretical conditions. Economists like Marshall discussed it.
But does it actually happen? Is it testable?
That's the key point the source makes. It argues that while logically possible, they're probably untestable in the real world and likely don't exist in practice, at least not in a way that fits the theory's conditions for market exchange.
Why not?
Because the very specific extreme conditions you'd need for a good to behave that way, like extreme poverty, a staple food making up almost all spending, mean it probably wouldn't be traded in a typical market where we could actually observe and test this price-demand relationship cleanly.
So the theoretical possibility, but maybe not something we actually see or can reliably test in real markets according to this framework.
Pretty much. More of a classroom example than a practical market phenomenon.
Fascinating. The conditions needed might prevent us from ever really observing it.
Right.
So we have these theories built on self-interest, scarcity, rules, but testing them in the real world, Sounds messy. How do economists actually do it?
It is messy. It's really challenging. You don't have controlled labs. Economists have to rely on observation. The source calls it street vendor observations.
Street vendor observations, I like that. It captures the idea of studying economics out in the wild, right?
Yeah.
Watching real people, real markets.
Exactly. Being a detective almost. And this is where those test conditions or constraints we talked about are vital.
Remind me about those.
Theories aren't supposed to work everywhere, always. They have specific conditions where they should apply. To test one, you need to find real-world situations where those conditions seem to hold.
And then see if the predicted outcome happens.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't happen, even when the conditions seem right.
Then the theory might be wrong. Refuted.
Potentially, yes. According to the scientific approach, the source mentions examples, anecdotes about observing markets, maybe referencing studies trying to grapple with real data, like that old Leicester study on truck driver wages. It shows the struggle to test ideas in these uncontrolled environments.
Okay, let's make this really concrete. The source gives a great example. The Hong Kong textile quota, Section 6, right? How does that show this framework in action?
Perfect example. It shows how changing the rules of the game completely changes competition and outcomes. So before the quota, Hong Kong textile firms were exporting, competing internationally.
How did they compete back then?
Mostly on price and quantity, trying to sell as much fabric as possible efficiently to gain market share. Standard stuff.
Standard competition. Then the quota comes in.
Right. An external rule change. A strict limit on the quantity, the total yardage or number of pieces that could be exported. Suddenly, there's a hard ceiling.
So they hit that limit. They couldn't just compete by making and selling more anymore. What happened then? This is the really interesting part.
The competition had to shift. If you can't sell more, how do you increase your revenue from the limited amount you can sell?
You sell something better, higher quality.
Exactly. Quality became the new dimension of competition. Within that fixed quota, producers realized they could make more money by exporting higher value premium textiles. A yard of fancy silk counted the same against the quota as a yard of cheap cotton, but it was worth far more.
So the quota, by blocking quantity competition, effectively pushed everyone towards quality competition. That was the way to win under the new rules.
Precisely. The outcome wasn't just less quantity, it was also higher average quality. It shows perfectly.
Right.
Self-interest, maximize profit, meets scarcity, limited quota, under new rules, leading to a predictable shift in behavior and outcome.
That really clarifies how changing the constraints redirects that competitive energy.
It does. It's a neat illustration of the theory predicting real-world shifts.
Okay, so pulling this all together, what are the big takeaways from this deep dive into Cheung's framework?
Well, we've explored this view of economics as a science focused on developing explanations for human behavior that are testable, refutable.
Built on foundations like self-interest.
Right, as an analytical assumption.
Yeah.
Operating within the realities of scarcity and competition. And all of it shaped powerfully by the rules of the game, property rights, regulations, customs.
And this isn't just abstract theory. For you, our listener, how can you use this way of thinking?
It gives you a lens, really, a way to look at the economic world differently. Instead of just seeing prices change or people choosing things or industries shifting.
You can ask why.
Exactly. Ask, what's scarce here? What are the incentives driving these choices, assuming self-interest? What are the specific rules or constraints? It helps you dig deeper than just description. It gives you a structure for analysis.
That's a really useful takeaway, a framework for asking better questions about the economic world around us.
It is, and maybe it leaves you with final thought to chew on. If all economic phenomena in this view ultimately arise from scarcity, competition, and self-interest operating under rules, what does that imply about finding explanations for human actions or market outcomes that are somehow truly outside this framework? Are there non-economic explanations, or is it all ultimately rooted in these fundamentals, just maybe expressed in complex ways?